So let's start at the beginning. How
Okay.
can we introduce all of the things that you do? All of them.
Oh, that is such a good question. So I guess we should start with the formal, right? So I am a master sergeant in the Air Force. I am a Russian linguist by trade. Been doing that for 19 and a half years. So I'm trained as an interpreter and a translator. In the military, they call that linguist. Not everyone is a translator or an interpreter. Other than that, I am a woodworker and a self-taught artist. I play guitar. I teach art workshops. I am a master resilience trainer. I'm certified as a master resilience training. So I teach resilience skills, gratitude, changing your thinking, value-based goals. Honestly, I think of all the things that I do, that's probably the one that brings the most satisfaction and fulfillment. I love teaching gratitude. So like, yeah, I'm a mom. So, forgot about that one.
That's the big one. That's the no days off one. I didn't know the master resilience. Is it master resilience trainer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm a certified MRT.
Very cool. And where do you get to practice that?
Well, I do it mostly at work. We teach younger airmen, people that are just coming in, basically resilience skills that they're going to need to deal with military life, right? Like we say, the only constant in military life is change. And a lot of people.
Or just life.
Right. And a lot of people join the military and it's their first time away from home and from the safety net of being with their parents. A lot of people are on the complete opposite spectrum and they don't have a safety net. They've been homeless and they join the military so they can have some constancy in their lives. So we have everyone in the spectrum. So we teach them resilience skills so that they are a little bit better equipped to deal with what they're about to face, because it's not easy being in the military. It's a good life, but it's not easy.
Right. So initially, when we first spoke about having these conversations, I wanted to invite you because I knew about the Russian linguist, and I also know that you come from Puerto Rico, and so we'll talk about that in a second. But I didn't know about the master resilience trainer, and I do think that also ties into what we're going to talk about, which is language.
Yes.
Because that's definitely something that you're being very explicit, I'm sure, on how you speak to your students, your trainees, or what kind of language they're using with others or with themselves. So this is, there's so many ways to go. So I'm going to try to keep it focused. But before we even kind of go down that rabbit hole, can you tell me a little bit about your language background? You spoke a little bit about the present day. Can you go back and get us to how did we get to Russian linguists, and what were your initial languages? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. Lived there for 20 years before I joined the military. While I was in Puerto Rico, obviously our language was Spanish. I come from, a family of, limited means, let's say, but my mom worked very, very, very hard to put me in a private school. Therefore, I was very lucky. Because I went to private school, I had an opportunity to learn English very well. So that really had an effect in, I would say, emotionally and rationally on me, because I was able to express myself in more than one language. I remember writing poetry as a 12-year-old in English, and I felt like there were expressions that I could put down on paper in English that didn't have the same feeling in Spanish. And then there are things that I would feel that I could only feel them in Spanish, not in English, because either I didn't know the words or I didn't have the registry. So I grew up bilingual. I didn't really have anyone to practice English with. So I would like watch TV with captions on, like Friends. Special place in my heart because I used to watch Friends with captions on, and like that's how I caught on to like popular speak, you know, like the vernacular of everyday life in the US. I learned through watching TV with captions, MTV and Friends in the 90s. That's how I learned the not so proper English, I guess. After that, when I was 20, I think, I joined the Air Force. And I didn't want just any job. I knew I wanted something that that could challenge me. I love learning. It's one of my strengths. So when I joined the Air Force, I chose to be a cryptologic linguist. That's what they were called. So I left Puerto Rico and went to Monterey, California, where the Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center is. And when I got there, they said to me, well, you already speak Spanish, so that shows you have a knack for learning languages. So go learn Russian. And then, you know, that's how Russian came into my life. I was very surprised at how comfortable learning Russian was because I learned the structure of English grammar because I had gone to private school. And because I had that solid foundation, then I picked up Russian, I would say a little bit easier than other people because I knew things like what is a gerund, you know, what is the present perfective, like all of those things. I came in with that knowledge. So honestly, I fell in love with Russian, and that was 2002, I think. Yeah, so since then, I have Spanish, English, and Russian pretty much in my everyday life.
Perfect. Spanish, English, Russian, Spanglish?
Spanglish, definitely. That one creeped up, yes.
And speaking to kind of language varieties, how did you see the difference between the Spanish that you knew in Puerto Rico and maybe the Spanish that was spoken in California, or even the English that was spoken in California versus what you were seeing on TV? Because sometimes we think, I know this language, this language, but then we go to a different space and you're like, do I speak this language?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was it was a shock, I think, because I grew up speaking Puerto Rican Spanish, which we know it's very particular, right? And then all of a sudden I start meeting all these people in the military that, you know, they come from Colombia or Peru or Bolivia, and I'm saying things and they don't mean the same things in other types of Spanish or their dialects. So I was like, oh my God, like I guess I never realized that we all speak the mother tongue, but it's very different. I remember traveling to Spain and I wanted to order a slice of an omelet. And he kept saying to me, ¿Quieres un pincho? And I was like, I don't want pinchos right now. Like pinchos to us is shish kebabs. And I was like, it's breakfast. Why would I eat shish kebabs for breakfast? So I said, no, the other one. So he brought me a full omelet for myself because I didn't order the pincho. But then that word means something else in Mexico, right? So like, it was definitely a shock. And I am way more appreciative now of the dialects of Spanish and the different cultures. And I am more conscious of what comes out of my mouth when I'm talking to someone that I know is not from Puerto Rico. I'm always treading carefully.
So you spoke a little bit about, well, you have a bunch of different languages, right? Not just the three.
Yeah.
And you spoke about language memories. I really liked when you talked about, you know, feeling certain things in certain languages, because I know that a lot of people argue that for either the simplicity or efficiency's sake, sometimes that, you know, amplifying a particular language, for example, everybody speaking one language, it would just be simpler. And anyone who speaks multiple languages, like, oh my gosh, you would take away my ability to feel or express myself and
right.
But do you have any particular language memories that stick out to you along those same lines that you were like, oh, thank goodness I had blank? Or,
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because it would definitely be a detriment to society as a whole if we didn't have the ability to express ourselves in multiple languages, right? Like there are certain languages that don't have certain words for feelings or things that happen, right? And I'll get to my memories about the language in a
Mhm.
minute, but I just want to mention that. Like, for example, the first time I heard the word Schadenfreude, right? Like Schadenfreude is enjoying somebody else's misery. And we don't have a word for that in English. We just use the German word because we can't substitute it, right? Like there are things that don't have words, and there are feelings that I can feel in Russian that I can't feel in English. And if I try to interpret it or translate it, it just doesn't have the same impact. Um, so I guess in that sense, my whole life as a consecutive interpreter for the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, it was all enmeshed in language, right? So I was an interpreter. So that was my main duty while I was there. So I would say not one just particular memory, but being able to interpret US policy to someone that a lot of people would consider our enemy, it just, knowing the language, you understand how close we are. Like we all want the same things. And you don't understand that unless you immerse yourself in the language. Like the Russians, for example, have a saying that language is given through culture and culture is only given through language. So they go hand in hand. You can't know somebody's culture unless you understand the language. Yeah, you may see a couple of things that make it into everyday life or like that TikTok will make popular. But if you really want to get to know someone, get to know their culture. And to get to know their culture, you need to know their language. There was this one night.
that's like, I just need to sit down for
Pause
a
for
second.
snaps.
Yeah, exactly. Because, for me, I definitely, in the education space, it's like, cultural proficiency or make cultural connections or cultural relevancy. And yet we're not talking about the language, and language is such a huge part of culture that if you aren't explicitly talking about both, I completely agree. And I just,
Right. And language can disarm a country. And what I mean by that is when you travel, if you, let's say you go to a country that has a completely different language than what you're used to, right? Like Japan. If you learn 2 or 3 phrases and your first interaction with a Japanese person, you open up the door by saying, look, I am here in your country and I want to respect it. So I have learned this phrase. And you learn, hello, how are you? Excuse me. Do you mind saying this to me in English? Those phrases, every time you go to a country, you've completely disarmed that initial apprehension that people have of strangers. And I experienced that in Germany. I learned really simple German phrases when I went to Germany. But whenever I encountered a waitress, the first thing I would say was, hello, I don't speak German. Could you please bring me an English menu? And I would say it in German. And you can see their facial expression changing because they know you've tried and they know you want to respect them. And the same thing happens to students here. There's students in my son's school that only speak Farsi or Dari, and they've just transferred into the school, right? And you take the counselor or the teacher and you open up that conversation, you can see in that kid's face how disarmed they feel, how uncomfortable, because they know that you're trying to reach over that gap of we have cultural differences. And so it's incredibly important. And language can bridge and it can disarm.
absolutely. I'm sorry I interrupted. We were talking about your language memory. You just have so many good points. Was I frozen?
You cut up a little bit there, so I only caught the last part of what you said.
So I interrupted your language memory. You just have so many good
Mm.
points.
Oh, right. I think what I was referring to, there's this one night we were on an inspection. So we're nuclear inspectors, nuclear arms inspectors. So we go to Russia, and I was in Siberia. We were just done with our inspection. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. And I leave the building that we had just inspected, and I have never seen so many stars in my life. Like, we're in the middle of Siberia, right? It's total darkness. And I'm looking up at the stars, and I see the Russian team interpreter stand next to me, and he looks up too. And for this 1 millisecond, here I am in the middle of Russia, this Puerto Rican who learned Russian, who's interpreting for a US diplomatic mission in Russia, standing next to a Russian, and we're both looking at the same sky, right? And for me, knowing Russian got me to that point, but that whole memory was enmeshed in language. There was no way I would have been able to be there at that moment with this man looking at the same stars if I hadn't had the language ability that I had. So not completely language related, but
Kind of,
so
yeah.
important.
I think it is completely language related. I like the first thought that you painted a beautiful picture, and I was just thinking like the thoughts that must have been going on in both of your heads. Probably a lot of similar appreciation for beauty.
The same.
And
yes.
It's probably going on in different languages and different mixes of languages. So
the same. And you know how I know we were thinking the exact same thing? Because when we went to our final dinner, the Russian team interpreter, they always do toasts. It's very common in Russia to do toasts during dinners. And his toast, he said, so that we may always look at the same skies and our children have the opportunity to see the same skies that we see. And I was like, oh my God, we would have never been able, to like enjoy that moment together if it wasn't for the fact that in the early 90s, late 80s, these senators got together and they thought we need to bridge the gap between Russian and English and have this treaty and work together. And it doesn't happen without language.
That's beautiful. So that's an excellent example of kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, the language idea.
Language as a resource.
Yeah, exactly. Language as a resource, definitely that you're practicing it in those particular spaces. And you're in an interesting space because you are in your particular job, you're practicing languages and language varieties, and yet you're also going into other spaces and practicing that language. And so that can be received in different ways. I think you've spoken a lot to how you approach different scenarios, which probably has a lot to do with the way that you are received. And I am also curious if you have had any situations where you've had to deal with maybe language as a problem, or had to either witness language as a right or advocated for language as a right.
Yeah, I absolutely have. Let me tell you, in the military, you'll experience all of these ideologies within days.
That's why I was so curious, because you reside in the space where you live in the language world more so than people maybe, because we all do, right? If you use language, then you're living in the language world, and you're maybe more aware of it than other people are. And so I think
absolutely, like, for example, language is a problem I saw really early in my career when not being so this accent, English accent that I have now, it took a long time to get here. Like, my Spanish accent was very, very thick when I first joined the military, and that used to be equated to ignorance, right? So the thicker the accent, the more people, or the less people expect from you. And it's just like, I've heard somebody say, just because you can win the argument doesn't mean you're correct, right? So just because you can't properly speak the language or you have a different accent doesn't mean that you aren't deemed valuable or educated or right for the position. So I learned I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I learned very early on that I needed to assimilate, right? So I started mimicking the sounds of how other people spoke English. And so that, I think, language was a problem. Very early defined the type of linguist that I was going to be. Language as a right, absolutely. So the Army and the Air Force actually have regulations that say that the working language of the military is English. So while I am in uniform, if I am conducting official business, I have to speak English, and that's understandable. It is the US military. But if I get together with my other Puerto Rican friends and we're all in uniform and we're having lunch together, we can speak Spanish. And I've had to defend my right to speak Spanish in uniform. I have been asked if I am a legal citizen because I was speaking Spanish while wearing my uniform. So these are things that I think you have to stand within your right to defend that. I've had to have these difficult conversations, but I've had to stand up for myself. And then obviously language as a resource, the extrinsic value of the language as a resource for diplomacy and all of those other things, it's innate, you can't deny it, but I've seen all of them.
So, and yes. I had a similar experience, and I don't know. So, is the policy that if you're in uniform that you have to speak English to
If you're
other
conducting official business,
conducting?
so I can't give orders in Spanish.
Okay, because when we're thinking about the orientations and the way that we kind of direct ourselves to make decisions about how we use language in spaces, when we speak different languages, we're encountered with those opportunities to either be explicit about defending your language as a right, or being explicit about promoting your ability to speak certain languages. In restrictive, I was in a space doing a Hispanic heritage celebration. We played Bomba en Plena in different places with the family band. And so we played at NSA one time, and we were speaking Spanish. I was obviously not in uniform. I'm not military, but I am a military brat. And so we were with the group and we were speaking Spanish because it is the language that we speak when we are as a family together. And in that particular space, they said, you need to stop speaking Spanish.
Wow. During Hispanic Heritage Month.
During Hispanic Heritage Month. And I was like super affected by it. Luckily, we ended up playing and we had a good time. Later on, the person who brought us on actually was also upset, brought it up to someone important in that particular space, and they ended up drafting up a letter of apology because it is, like you said, they have a language policy, but that is not part of it. And so that goes back to, if we are not aware of the language policies that we have in place, then we make assumptions and we go by our feelings or our ideologies and we say, this is a problem. I don't understand. I'm feeling nervous.
Right. And it's very emotional, right? Because the reason, and I don't know, maybe this is just my opinion, but the reason people are uncomfortable is because they don't understand. And language creates an in-group and an out-group, right? So like if you and I are speaking Spanish, then we've created our in-group, and whoever's not understanding this conversation in Spanish is in the out-group. And we don't like to feel rejected. As human beings, we do not like that we can't partake in something, because then we've isolated ourselves from that. So sadly, it has become the responsibility of the speaker of the other language to educate, which shouldn't be the case. But if we don't do it, who's going to do it, right? So like, I have to know these policies so I can stand up for myself, because nobody else is going to fight this fight for me. So sadly, it is like that. And it takes a lot of self-reflection to keep explaining these things, but if I want culture to survive, then I have to do it.
You know many languages and you don't know many languages.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that you are in spaces unexpectedly, obviously, because if you travel, you know where you're going and you prepare yourself, you've spoken to that.
Mhm.
And there are times where you're probably in that same exact space where you don't know the language, maybe can feel uncomfortable. How do you deal with that in those moments? Understanding that we don't know everything and we're not
Right.
expecting anyone to know everything. So what would you share with someone who is feeling that way as someone who has been on both sides?
Right. So I may be the odd man out, but I love hearing languages that I don't understand. Same. Okay. We're on. So if I travel and I'm in location where I hear other people speaking languages I don't understand, I have found that the best course of action is to be humble about it. Right. So a smile translates in any language. If you approach people and carefully, respectfully let them know that, hey, I want to be part. I want to understand. And this is not easy to say. It's not. It's very vulnerable for people to say, I want to be part of your group. I want to understand. Help me understand. But I've gotten really good at saying it. So it's really the only way. You have to be able to put yourself out there and realize that you've put yourself out there. One of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to accept you and teach you, or you're going to get rejected. And if you get rejected, then you choose how you deal with that. It's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility.
Mhm. I love that because in speaking about the orientations, we kind of have a feeling that like restrictive is going to be like, ooh, we don't want to restrict. But where a lot of spaces end up is often the tolerance orientation, where it's kind of like, I'm just not going to engage. I'm just going to either ignore or I'm going to, I know my name starts with an X. A lot of people, that's it. They can't, they say, I'm not even
They
going
go to your last name.
yeah, exactly. Since I was like 4 or 5 years old, I went, Miss Rivera, because they didn't even want to go there. So, but what you're saying is more active. What you're saying is what I find that we need more of, the promotion orientation,
Right.
that humility, that extending yourself and saying, I don't know, but I'm willing to, and I can't
Right.
do it all, but I'm going to do what I can.
Mm-hmm. Like
So,
it's really between the lines. When you say, I don't understand, help me understand, you're saying, I want to share this moment with you, right?
mhm,
Which you, in any language, in any culture, all people want the same thing. They want to be happy. They want their children to be happy. They want their country to succeed. It does not matter what country, it does not matter what language, we all want the same thing. We want to feel loved, we want to feel respected. So if you learn how to interpret that without language, like if a look, a kind gesture, a hug, a smile, any of those things will open the door for you to join that in group. Maybe not join completely, but to have an into the in group,
mhm,
if that makes sense.
that does. This is all coming up. This is all of our language. You've traveled
Yes.
significantly. And so how do you see these ideologies or orientations? How do you see any of this popping up in other spaces versus where you're currently located? You're currently somewhere in the US.
As far as like how I'm received when I travel, because I bring all these things that are foreign with me.
Bring all of this linguistic repertoire, all of this cultural background, you've got a beautiful mix of all of these things. So then how do you feel like
Yeah.
perceived maybe in another country or in
Mhm.
the United States in
So
certain
I
US?
go with the understanding that not everyone is receptive, right? So I already know that when I go, and
Mm,
it prepares me for whatever reaction I get. If I am well received, then great, let's enjoy this trip. But if I am not, then I'm emotionally prepared for that, right? So I went to a country in the Baltic area, Latvia, right? And when I went to Latvia, I went on an immersion for a Russian trip. And the thing about my face is that I look like a gypsy. To most Eastern Europeans, I look like a gypsy. So most people did not hold eye contact with me when I went to Latvia. Like when I went in the morning to the cafe to order my morning coffee, the lady would look at the register, ask me what I wanted, and she wouldn't look at me in the eye. But I expected that because I was culturally aware when I went. So for me, the important thing that I thought I did was I will make sure that what I say to her is very respectful, that she understands that I am a foreigner, but that I'm not there for a bad purpose. So I was very profuse. I profusely thanked her. I said, please and help you. And I told her to have a good day and, all of the good things in her language, because I am the person that's visiting her country. So I just always go with the understanding that I am going to somebody else's country. Let me see what respect means to them, and I'll bring that with me.
so you understand that they
I
have
think that's
biases.
incredibly important.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You
And
understand.
especially if I'm going for a short trip,
Mhm.
like if I'm going for a short trip, let's be real, I'm not going to educate the world in 2 weeks. So let me just be respectful, right? I'll fight
Mhm.
that fight at home.
No, I love that. You understand that they have biases
Yeah,
and you
everybody
have
does.
passion. Yeah, exactly. They do, we do, I do, you do, we all do. So let's have compassion for the
Right,
process
right.
and maybe learn a little bit more about where you're going and what you're doing.
Yes.
Um, I wonder, so you spoke to mindfulness and the practice of, remind me the title.
The resilience skills.
Resilience. Okay, yes. And I wonder how that ties into how you see all of this, or did you know this before? And these resilient skills are just like, oh, that's the word for it. But I've been practicing this. How does
I
language tie in there?
Right. So I love that you asked that question because it's a whole different language, right? Talking about language, emotional language is a completely different thing. You might be a native English speaker
Mhm.
and still not have the language to correctly express your emotions. So how I didn't know how to be grateful. I didn't know how to practice gratitude. I didn't know any of those things until I was certified and started teaching resilience skills, right? And I see that pretty much every time I teach a workshop. There are a lot of times that we don't have the language to express what we are feeling, what the emotion is, what our reaction to a certain situation is. There are a lot of people that live traumatic lives and don't have the language to express what they feel about that trauma, right? Even in their own English language, right? So being a resilience trainer has given me a whole different set of skills that enables me to help people say what they feel, say what they want, say what they need, say what they appreciate, all of those things. That's a completely different language. And it's arguably harder than a lot of other ones. Like it's probably easier to learn Russian than it is to express yourself to someone, right? Like it's such a vulnerable thing.
Mhm.
If I express my gratitude to you, I'm opening up a part of me that I don't necessarily want to share with the world. So that's already a very vulnerable space. And I think vulnerability is probably the key to developing all of those resilient skills and language to express those things. So it's not easy.
Yeah, no, I love that because there's this assumption that if you've spoken a language for a long period of time, maybe even your whole life, that you know all of the language. And, and that often prevents people from learning other languages because they say, I know this language so well, and I don't know this other language, and there's so much to learn. And what you just said is like, no, we got stuff to learn in our dominant language, and whatever language you think that you're killing it in, you're doing a great job in, we still got work to do. So there's always more to learn when it comes to language.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So one of the last workshops that I did about 2 weeks ago, I always get feedback after, written feedback. And one of the feedbacks was, I don't like to talk about my feelings. That was it. Like, that was the feedback to my workshop. And I was like, okay, like, first of all, that doesn't tell me anything about how I did, but let's unpack for a minute. I don't like to talk about my feelings. And I'll probably use that as an example for my next workshop onto how to open the water, like do the, the little icebreaker that we do at the beginning. I'll probably start with that because it's such a vulnerable thing to say. And whoever said it didn't say it in the class. They only said it in the feedback. I don't like to talk about my feelings. But because we don't have the language, probably.
Exactly. It is difficult, period, because of what you said, the vulnerability. And when you don't even have the words to express yourself, it is even more challenging when I'm asked to by a therapist or by life coach or anyone,
right.
Where do you feel those feelings? It's like, I don't know.
There are connections that we don't normally make either. I have a very good friend, Mr. Charleston Gaines, who's also a life coach and a resilience trainer. And he posted a poll, right? POLL. My accent coming up on LinkedIn.
First of all, it's a beautiful way of speaking. We all have accents. You don't think you have an accent. You look in the mirror.
That's funny.
And that was perfect.
So he posted this thing on LinkedIn and he asked this question: does your definition of success include happiness? And I was like, you just blew my mind, because first of all, I would have never put happiness in the definition of success. And second, you've just given me the language to justify what I am doing now. So I am about to retire from the military and I'm just going to start my own business and see what happens. Right. So, right. Let's hope. So
no, it's going to happen.
But that becomes a definition of success for me. And I didn't have that language before. Right? So sometimes they're just connections that we don't even know need to be made. That's why it's important to have these type of conversations. That's why it's important to have conversations that are very uncomfortable, so that you can learn more about yourself, so that you can learn to understand others. And sometimes it happens in your native language and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, I've gotten to know people in Russia, in Japan, or in Germany, or wherever I was, because I put myself out there and I had a very uncomfortable conversation with very few words, but I opened up something really important. And then other times it happens in English.
Right. The most powerful moments in learning, in life, in growth come from those uncomfortable moments. The first blog post that I wrote was exactly that. Like, let's get ready for some uncomfortable conversations, because this life work is hard. It's hard stuff, especially if you're trying to level up, if you're trying to create new opportunities for yourselves, for others, especially those who have not been given equitable spaces. And so if you think that it's challenging for you and you have certain opportunities, and I'm not saying you, I'm saying the royal you.
No, I
If
understand
you
it.
think that you have, if it's challenging for you and you have certain privileges and opportunities, imagine those friends who are doing it because they must, because they don't have
Right.
a choice, they don't have the opportunity. So
Right. And at that moment, once you've come to that realization, you know, you have two things, you have two choices. You can either help them, or you can say, you know what, it took me a lot of work to get to where I am. Good luck. Hopefully it's the first one. Right.
mhm,
So, but you know, that just depends on the person, I guess.
exactly. And the language that they have around that. You, I want to make sure that I leave time for your your thoughts behind. You have two little ones. Well, one not so little one, one littler one. And they they have their own linguistic repertoire. And
Yeah.
so, and you've been thoughtful about that process and the decisions that you make around language for them. And
Yes.
so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I am very deliberate when it comes to language and my children. So my daughter speaks Spanglish, Spanish, and English. And this year she's in 8th grade and she's taking French. So it's been wonderful because I've gotten to like pull all my French from college, which is terrible, but it's there. But I do try to make it a point, and I try to harp so that they can understand that language is incredibly important. Language will open up the world for you, right? So to be able to speak more than one language, to me, it's right up there with getting good grades and being a good citizen. Because you can't really truly get to know other people, other cultures, other societies, if you don't make the effort. So speaking more than one language is a rule in my home. My son is a little more reluctant, but he's 8, so he understands everything I say in Spanish, but he just has more trouble speaking it. But for the longest time, whenever I put them to bed, I will say, I love you, ya te bien bleu in Russian, je t'aime in French, ti amo in Italian, te amo. So we go through the whole gamut. And then I love you and good night. We say it in however many languages we can come up that day. And we listen to music in all languages too. Like our playlist has English, Creole, Russian, German, French pop, which is amazing, all kinds of languages. So it's very important for us. It's very important for me. And I think my daughter at her 14 years now, it's understanding how it opens up the world for you. So I'm taking her to France later next year. And one of the rules was we are not going until you can order for yourself and until you can, you know, have a simple conversation in French. So she's working on that now.
That's
It's
so
great.
important. I remember when I was in high school and my Spanish wasn't what I wanted it to be, and we came to Puerto Rico, and my dad was like, "You're hungry? Order for yourself." And it was like at Subway where you had to order. You know, it's not just like order a meal. You have to say, "And I want the pickles, and I want the da, 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 da." And I was so embarrassed that my Spanish wasn't what I believed that it should have been. Well, you know, whatever. I obviously had work to do.
Preconceived notion of how Spanish should sound.
Exactly. I had work to do because I was speaking languages. So I went without eating that day because I suffered. And so is he. And he was like, "You don't order, you don't
You
eat."
don't eat. That's funny.
But I mean, that just goes back to exactly what you said about, you know, the vulnerability and just try.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the lady who was taking my order would not have cared if I did what I could in Spanish and then kind of, you know, trans language went between the two languages, but
Right.
not using
That's
my
funny. But
for.
you know, I will say that it has taken me, as a mom, it has taken me a long time to get comfortable with that position of I will speak Spanish with my children wherever and whenever. When I was a new mom, I had been in the US probably for about 5 or 6 years. And I remember being out with my daughter. She was probably 1 or 2 at that time. And we were at some store, I don't know, but she said something to me in Spanish, asked for something in Spanish, and I responded in English because I had this like fear in the back of my head that somebody would hear us speaking Spanish and automatically assume that I was there illegally or doing something I wasn't supposed to do, or like I was ignorant, or like I had all these notions in my head, these prejudices, and like biases and all these things that you hear in the media. And then it took me a long time to be out with my kids anywhere and speak Spanish and be confident about it. It wasn't an easy thing, but I'm glad I got over that fear.
So that leads me to my second to last question, and I can talk to you all day. This is definitely the first of many conversations. But what would you tell you? What do you wish that your younger self would have known about language or
About language.
languages?
Oh my God, that it opens up the world. That I can feel so many more things because I know other languages. That I have so many ways of expressing myself, like I wish I would have been more comfortable in my ability to feel and learn things than I was. It took me such a long time to do that because I thought I had so many things going on. Like I can't lose my Spanish, right? Like the proper Spanish I learned. I can't mix Spanish and English. All of those things. I wish I would have gotten over them sooner. But I think most importantly, I wish I would have known how it was going to open up the world for me.
I mean, it did.
Yeah, literally and figured.
Exactly. It literally did. So thank goodness that you didn't have to learn that the hard way, because
Yeah,
you, despite those fears that I guess we all have, it just goes to show that if you do it anyway, if you're scared and you do it anyway,
right.
you'll end up right where you're supposed to be.
Right. Like the man in the arena. It's not the critic who counts.
Oh, hold on. I don't know that one. You're going to have to share that with me.
Oh, it's Teddy Roosevelt. He, on a speech that he did, said it's not the critic who counts. And it's a very long quote because it was a very long speech. But the important part is it's the man in the arena, the one who's marred with scars and blood and tears and shed, the one who is doing the deeds. He's the one who counts, not the critic.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's good. I asked. Let's not assume, because that was fantastic. So the reason why I wanted to kind of create this particular space, speaking about language policy directly and speaking with different people from different levels of our ecosystem, was to demonstrate that we are seeing language policy everywhere. We're seeing it in our social lives, we're seeing it in our professional lives, we're seeing it abroad, we're seeing it on home turf, we're seeing it at the local Target, when our daughters are talking to us in Spanish.
Right.
And so I want to make the concept of language policy more accessible by just demonstrating how it's really just a direction that you're taking in terms of languages to either, value it as a resource to promote the rights to access different languages or to maintain your languages. So if you have some sort of a language policy that you either have for yourself or your home, what would be your personal language policy?
So, I mean, I think it goes back to what I said about my kids. Our language policy is you must speak more than one. That's it. Like, you must understand others, and in order to find yourself, in order to understand what it is that you like, that you respect, that you don't respect, that you appreciate, all of those things. And if you like put these blinders on and you focus on one thing, you're missing out on so much. Like, it's, to me, it's incredibly important to grow as a human, to learn other cultures. And you can't learn other cultures unless you at least learn a little bit of their language, right? So you must speak more than one. That is policy number one. And you must respect. Even when you don't understand, you must respect. So if I hear my son, who has done it, sadly, mock an accent or mock a language that he doesn't understand, he's usually deflecting because he's uncomfortable. So we have a conversation about it. You know, if I say something really quickly in Spanish in words that he still doesn't understand, he'll go, meh, 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 meh. So we stop, we have a conversation about how that can offend someone, about what it means when you disrespect the language, all of those things. So we talk about it, we have the uncomfortable conversations, and the policy is you must speak more than one and you must respect them all. That's it.
That's beautiful. That's exactly what we should all be practicing.
It's not easy, but it's doable.
Exactly. You have your woodworking space.
Yeah.
And you are going into this resiliency work. And so I want to make sure that if people want to follow up with you, that they can follow up with your journey, your woodworking, your resiliency training, or just, contact you and follow you because you're amazing. So
oh, thank you. Yeah. So where can they find me? So I have Instagrams for each one of my ventures. At Art May Happen is my art/mental health journey. At Craft and Market is my woodworking space. And then I teach the first Wednesday of every month with Community Building Artworks, a nonprofit in Maryland. And I teach art and resilience workshops for veterans to deal with anxiety, depression, whatever they're dealing with. So I love holding that space the first Wednesday of every month. And that's it.
Valerie, thank you so much for this conversation and for the work that you do professionally and personally with languages and advocating for promoting linguistic diversity. It's amazing what you do on the local level and what you spread out to the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I enjoyed this a lot more than I was expecting. So I get nervous in front of the camera, and sometimes I say stupid things, but I really loved having this conversation. And I love that you're doing this because, like, for example, I watched that other video of the interview that you did before, and there's so many perspectives that, as a linguist who has worked with languages for 20 years, I wasn't even aware. And then I see them and I'm like, oh, they are in my everyday life, these orientations, these ideologies, all of these beliefs. So I really love what you're creating. I love this whole thing that you have going on. I think it's great. So I really appreciate you inviting me to do this. So thank you
so much. No, I'm so glad that you are finding it applicable. That's exactly what it's all about. And I got your back if you want something edited. We can edit it. I thought it was spectacular. So I'm pause the recording.